question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. We need greater online security. We've just seen over the last, years now, just how many internet scams are being experienced across the country. Criminal and sometimes malevolent state-sponsored or even state actors have found ways to subvert and steal personal documents and identity, and sometimes phone bank numbers and bank accounts. The ACCC Scam Watch report shows that our seniors have been shown to be especially vulnerable, having not grown up with the online cues that others perhaps are more accustomed to. They find themselves not only more susceptible to scams, but also more targeted. The Anti-Scam Centre reports that Australians lost $2.74 billion in scams in 2023 and $3.1 billion in 2022. That small decline is due to the strong action taken by the Albanese Labor government and the Minister for Cyber Security since coming to office. But it is still a huge amount of money, and we cannot be complacent, especially with the advent of commercial AI and the danger that it carries. And obviously there we're not even counting the cost of the personal toll and the stress it takes on any single person that's subjected to these scams. And yes, we've seen the serious number of data breaches in Australia across the corporate world. The Latitude breach in 2023 saw 14 million customers affected across Australia and New Zealand. Medibank had 9.7 million people affected by a breach in 2022, where the Russian-based gang demanded a $10 million ransom. The Optus data breach in 2022 saw 9.8 million customers affected. These breaches are not just affecting current customers, but they also reach into the past. The Optus breach, for example, included personal information collected by Optus as far back as 2017. In 2018, the ANU suffered a breach, which was not discovered until 6 months later. The information stolen included names, addresses, phone numbers, dates of birth, emergency contact details, tax file numbers, payroll information, bank account details, even student academic results. So instead of having to provide identification documents again and again to all manner of private organisations, companies and departments, some of which these entities or the parent entities are residents offshore and not always effectively or even directly subject to our laws, this legislation will enable us all to be able to secure an ID and provide it once, and then to rely on that single government ratified point of reference to satisfy ID requirements for all manner of purchases, memberships, contracts and registrations. It is a voluntary scheme designed to allow all of us to more easily and securely protect ourselves in the day-to-day dealings with government, business and other organisations which require proof of identification. And I have now received correspondence of concerns around the introduction of a digital ID, unfortunately inflamed by some of those opposite, trying to link to various conspiracy theories. Some of the communication, those opposing the ID, do so because they don't actually understand its purpose, the benefits to security. But in explaining that we're adopted, that the system will make people safer than they are at present, as they'll be providing their personal data to one highly secured repository rather than many different ones, some of which do have lax security and some of which, as said, is data being held offshore. But those concerns that centre around privacy and the voluntary nature of the scheme are, in fact, legitimate. And I do thank my constituents for raising these matters of concern with me. And being a responsible government, we've ensured that privacy is, in fact, built into the legislation. Express consent is required to create a digital ID, and that consent can be withdrawn at any time. Guardrails are there to prevent the collection of particular types of information, preventing data profiling, tracking or the use of data for marketing purposes. And I know for myself, we all use different platforms for different reasons, be it for shopping or banking, but even just to be able to book accommodation online, you're now having to not just offer up your driver's licence as proof of ID, you also have to take a photo of your face for facial ID recognition. And this data is now being held by an overseas organisation, and have got no assurance as to where that data is being used, who it's being sold on to. And it's these sorts of examples in the day-to-day where we're actually interacting with organisations that require, in order to be able to access their services, to produce personal identification, that this bill goes to the heart of. It's intended to ensure that people can have a means to provide a single digital ID that doesn't hold all that sensitive data that could potentially be misused or manipulated by people around the world. And digital ID is being embraced as an answer to online criminal activity all over the world. Germany has one, Hungary is launching its digital ID, India has a digital ID, Sri Lanka has a digital ID, Singapore has a digital ID, Malaysia has a digital ID, and many countries are developing one, including the UK, Ethiopia, Kenya and Bahrain. In Germany, in fact, for Member Kennedy's information, reports indicate that 63% of Germans are actually using it. So they feel confident and comfortable with the fact that it's far better to have a single source of ID that's encrypted, rather than having to engage with every single business or entity and share your personal identity and information there instead. So they are voting with action by actually utilising their system. And in fact, the previous government started looking at this as early as 2016, but for whatever reason were unable to finish it, because between their work between 2016 and 2022, 6 years, nothing done. But perhaps like many other portfolio areas, this was yet another case in point where division was in the party room. As Minister Hasluck commented on this issue in 2018, they couldn't keep track of all the projects that were going off the rails. And yet another example there, the member for Bradfield spoke in this debate on the amount of time and energy it can take for any person in this country to prove their identity to a bank. He used the words long, cumbersome and painful process. I can only agree, and it's yet another reason why this legislation should have in fact been enacted a long time ago, and it's why we're getting on with it now. The member for Bradfield also described the proposed governance structure of the Digital ID Bill as fragmented, because different parts of that governance structure are responsible to different ministers. That is not a design fault. That is a design feature. Wholly reasonable concerns about privacy and probity and security need to be met by a structure that instills confidence, partly by ensuring that different parts of the governance structure are independent of each other. We cannot have public confidence if checks and balances are not built into the system. The member for Bradfield also had the gumption to speak of dither and delay. The government of which he was part did little else in this, and across so many areas. We are acting. We are catching up with the world. The bill is here, and given that the opposition were trying without success to put it together on their watch, they should be supporting it now, and not pretending that they won't go all out and register themselves for a digital ID as soon as they can too. And how are we showing our commitment to this digital ID? We're certainly doing it with a lot of money. $288.1 million has been allocated for the National Digital Identity Program. The 2024-25 funding will be used to run pilots with the private sector and develop the infrastructure, the regulation and the security. Businesses will be able to participate in the scheme within 2 years of the passage of this bill. Most of this funding, $156 million, will be spent by the Australian Taxation Office to upgrade the MyGov platforms to allow users to securely access government services on behalf of a business using a digital ID. Another $23.4 million will be spent to upgrade the encryption of the MyGov and MyGov ID platforms, because we rightly expect that the security will be of the highest order for this system. So, in summary, the use of this digital ID will be voluntary. Organisations will need to provide alternatives for those who do not wish to use the system. It won't be difficult, for each organisation or government department already has a system for requiring and proving ID. But this bill will reduce the need for people to share their personal and their identification documentation and other information repeatedly with the many departments and businesses that now require it as standard practice. This bill will make people safer. It will make our holding of our personal identification more secure, convenient, and will ensure it's voluntary. I commend the bill to the House, and I thank the Minister for her stewardship.